Good evening, everybody. My name is Nam Kang, and here's my Unit 3 overview for LMU EDES 5252. I decided to focus my unit on Age of Classical Empires. Now, if you teach world history, you should know that classical empires are often dubbed as the golden ages of the world. So these are empires such as Han China, Mauryan India, Persia, Greece, and Rome, and they all achieved some historical, cultural, technological achievements that influenced the world that came after them. I do teach AP World History, so relatively my unit's content heavy with a lot of emphasis on writing assignments and classroom discussions. Through writing assignments and classroom discussions, I hope to push my students' critical thinking and metacognitive skills. I really want them to understand how to gather data, take those data that they gathered and structure it in a way that is organized and be able to present them in a manner that is acceptable to the people who are listening and hearing about the information. So we dive in on my homepage. We talk about student demographics, key accommodation, the central focus of this unit, which is allowing my students to analyze these empires and help them compare and contrast the similarities and differences of their governmental development, scientific achievement, religious development, and cultural development. Also, because they're classical empires, they did a lot of achievement. They achieve a lot of things that they're still seeing in the world today. So hopefully by end of the unit, my students will be able to see how the history is relevant to their lives, as they can see the achievements are still around in the world today. So when we dive into day one, I introduce to the students the central theme and focus of the unit, so that they're aware of what's expected from them to learn, so they can measure at the end of the unit what was expected out of me in the beginning of the unit and have I achieved those at the end of the unit. I also introduced my Age of Empire project through this worksheet in the beginning of the unit, so they understand what is expected out of them for this research project. My students will be dividing themselves into groups of 5, and each student will be responsible for one empire. Now, once they divide that responsibility, they will get into their expert groups or other students in other groups who have the same empire as them, and they'll research the empire together and gather information and share information to make it easier for them when they write the essay. Things that they should be covering are such things as timeline, culture, gender structure, social structure, governmental structure, and historical achievements. They'll take those information, write a 5-paragraph essay, and I also go over with them the rubric of the paper so they know how it's going to be graded. The second page, it shows the timeline of the project. They'll also learn how to write a research paper and use APA format. As we know, social studies use the APA format, unlike in English class. And they'll also go into the library and gather information. Day 2, we dive into research day 1. We're going to talk about, here's the day where they'll get into their groups of 5 and divide the responsibilities. Every day I present my students with the PowerPoint so they can visually see what is going on throughout the day. Day 3 is quite exciting as they learn how to write a research paper. The highlight of day 3 is to help my students understand why they're writing the research paper. I do go over a little bit on day 1, but my student needs to understand that a research paper is a lot like the DBQ they'll be expected to write on their AP exam, which is answering a prompt by forming a thesis and backing up or supporting their thesis with evidences from a source. Like in a research paper, they have to use citations, find relative facts and information to support their thesis, which is exactly what the document-based questions are about. So I draw that inference with them so they understand why they're writing the research paper and how it's going to benefit them at the end of the course. Now, day 4 and 5, this is starting my block period, as my Mondays are my regular days, and then Tuesday to Friday are my block schedules. So here my students actually will go into the library to gather information, and before we go in, I briefly once again go over the primary and secondary source, which we already covered in unit 2, I mean. This is important for them because they need to recognize which sources are credible and which is more credible than others. My students will be going to encyclopedias, textbooks, just history books, and websites. So I gave this worksheet out to them in Unit 2, but once again, they'll take this out before we go in so they understand once again what's a primary source and what's a secondary source. Day 6 and 7 is going to be my first content day, which is the Persian Empire. I use PowerPoint so they can visually see what they're supposed to be writing about and visually be able to see what each topic of the slides are. Now, my class notes are quite different than most people. I know a lot of teachers use guided notes or fill in the blanks for students to follow as the lecture goes on. I actually do a question form class notes. This is so that my students can take in the information I give them during the lecture, own it, make it their own, and form the answers to these questions. I believe when my students are able to take what I teach them and form it into words that they understand to answer the question, they'll be able to own that information. I think regurgitating information is not helpful to the students as they do not learn to think for themselves. They don't learn to how comprehend the information to make it their own. So I really enjoy this class format as they'll be able to form answers based on what they've learned. Day 7 and day 8 here, we'll be diving into a research paper rough draft day 1. I try to give time in my class to do classwork because I give chapter notes for homework. That's the only homework I give out, which is they have to read chapters of the unit and make an outline for each chapter. I don't tell them what to write about or what to take notes on. Rather, I try to teach them the skill of reading through a text, picking out the main ideas, and forming an outline so that they understand what they've just read. For day 8 and for day 9 and 10, I'll be allowing my students to work on the rough draft in class so that they can send it to me early and I can check, do the rough draft, make corrections, and hopefully give them back in timely manner for them to finish editing it for their rough draft. I'm diving into day 11. It's going to be Greek Empire day 1. I'm expecting this to be divided to 2 days as day 11 will most likely be a Monday. So when we look at the PowerPoint, we're going to be diving into Greece's archaic period, classical period, and Hellenistic period once Alexander the Great takes over. Continuing on this lesson from day 12 and 13, it's going to be Greek philosophers. Here, I'll be actually hosting a Socratic seminar. My students have already done Socratic seminar in Unit 1 and Unit 2, so they know what's expected out of them. And for the topic for this Socratic seminar will be about Plato and Aristotle. Now, if you know anything about Plato and Aristotle, their approach to humanity was quite different, despite the fact Aristotle was seen as a pupil of Plato. Plato looked at humanity from an idealistic perspective, like how humans should behave, and Aristotle focused on how does humans actually behave. And the guiding question for the seminar is, Plato and Aristotle had difference in views of humanity through idealistic and realistic point of view. Which philosophy should have more impact on the way we look at humanity? I try to form my questions for these classroom discussion in a way there's no right or wrong answer, so my students can think critically and think outside the box. Also, an important skill I need for them to understand here is learn how to respond to someone else's opinion by taking in what they've just said, the information they gave you, analyze it, comprehend it, and then structure what they know in an organized manner and present them so that the opposing side can hear it and understand it. I think my students really need to understand how to advocate for themselves, as a lot of my students are very emotional. They have a lot of emotional therapy. So lots of times they get angry instead of learning how to advocate for themselves. So um, learning to gather data, learning to analyze the information, and structuring it into a presentable manner is important and essential for my students. Day 14 and 15 go into the Roman Empire. A big emphasis here for me is how Roman Republic mirrors that of United States. I'm really excited for this lesson as Roman citizenship is like a lot like American dream. People looked at Rome and said foreigners were saying, hey, I could participate in the government. I could run for office and make changes to this great empire. However, when the foreigners did come in, they were not able to gain lands, which means they were not able to serve in the military for 10 years, meaning they couldn't run for office and they end up working on farmlands of these Roman citizens who served in the army, which is a lot like United States here. Foreigners come here to better their lives for their family, but they end up having the systematic oppression and they end up working in low pay, non-skilled jobs. So I really love that comparison I'll be making here between Rome and United States. Day 16 focuses on Han China. Here, I really want to tell them about Confucianism and how meritocracy, how people earn their position by taking tests, which is what we do here in the United States. Teachers, police officers, engineers, doctors, we all have to prove to the people and to the state that we know the knowledge to be where we are, which is what Confucianism really taught. And then day 17 and 18, we'll dive into Han China, Mauryan Empire. We'll be going over how the differences are. And then day 19 will be DBQ Workday. So I'll actually give out, oh, this is Unit 2 again. I mistitled it. But they'll be given the prompt, which is to agree or disagree whether these empires are classical empires. And then I have comprehension questions here at the bottom they can answer to really understand what each documents are talking about. And hopefully by end of the lesson, my students will be able to form their thesis and their 3 bucket statements. Now we all know thesis is the most essential part of the essay. Once my students get the thesis down, they should be able to form their entire essay. Day 20 and 21 will be my Unit 2 exam. My Unit 2 focused on negative questions, so my students learn how to translate negative questions into a positive question, and they'll be also presenting. They'll be presenting with the Unit 2 DBQ. Breakdown of my unit exams are 30 minutes for multiple choice and 60 minutes for the DBQ, so it mirrors that of the AP exam. So overall, that is my Unit 3. It says Unit 2. I need to fix that. Unit 3 for LMU. Unfortunately, my video can't go over 15 minutes as I'm using the Screen-O-Matic, the free version, so you won't let me record more than 15 minutes. But I'm really excited for this unit. Hoping that my students can really understand how these empires influence the world that they live in, and hopefully we can make it really relevant for them so that they can see why it's important to learn history, because they need to understand the roots of the society that they're living in today. So, thank you.